The Black Hole in Salem, 1995. Let me be perfectly clear. I don't merely dislike Halloween. I loathe it. And my disdain has nothing to do with costumes, sugary treats, or childish pranks. It is a deep, scarring, visceral rejection of a night I have come to associate with pure, unadulterated predation. Every October, when the fake cobwebs begin to appear across porch railings in my adopted town of Salem, Massachusetts, I am taken straight back to that first night, 1995, when the veil between the mundane and the monstrous felt impossibly thin. Back then, I was 18 and attempting to cultivate a brooding, artistic persona, a writer waiting for the world to inspire him. I lived in a dilapidated attic apartment overlooking a quiet, cobblestone street in the older part of town. My window was my fortress, my vantage point. Most of the year, it was a source of Gothic charm, watching the centuries-old houses brood beneath the gaslight. But on Halloween, it became a window onto hell. I was hunched over my desk, meticulously carving a pumpkin. Not a happy face, but a sneering, deeply distorted visage. A reflection of the churning dread I felt whenever the calendar flipped to the 31st. The town was alight with a macabre energy, a mixture of tourist-fueled revelry and the genuine, palpable sense of ancient wickedness that clings to Salem like wood smoke. Around 8 o'clock, the trick-or-treating crescendo was hitting its peak. I watched the children pass below, miniature witches, tiny vampires, and the perennial, slightly too old teenagers in ironic thrift store costumes. I was sipping stale coffee, trying to ignore the noise, when the air outside my window seemed to grow heavy, deadening the festive sound. It wasn't a car, not really. It was a vehicle that groaned, a low, metallic moan that suggested effort and decay. I craned my neck to see it pull up next to a group of 3 children. It was a van, yes, but unlike any commercial vehicle I'd ever seen. It was painted a color that seemed to absorb all light. A matte, absolute black, devoid of reflection. It looked like a hole torn in the fabric of the night. The children, 2 girls and a boy, all around 10 years old, stopped. The boy, Jeremy, was dressed as a wounded angel, his small white tunic ripped, fake blood smeared across his cheek. He was the one closest to the van when the driver's side door opened. A figure emerged from the driver's side. He wasn't overtly large, but his movements possessed a shocking, unnatural economy, like a spring-loaded trap snapping open. He wore dark, bulky clothing that seemed far too heavy for the mild October air. But it was his face that ripped through my focus and burrowed into my nightmares. He wore a mask. Not plastic or rubber, but something that looked like tanned, aged leather, meticulously molded into a face. The key feature was a fixed, grotesque smile. The corners of the mouth stretched far too wide, revealing teeth-like stitching. The skin of the mask was deeply wrinkled, suggesting pain and relentless, hungry age. He didn't need to lure them with candy. He simply spoke, and his voice was a low, sibilant whisper that somehow carried through the glass of my closed window. The children, particularly Jeremy, leaned in, their innocent curiosity overriding their natural fear. Predation, I thought, a word I'd read but never truly understood until that moment. This wasn't a snatch and grab. It was a seduction of the abyss. The man moved to the back of the van, opening the double doors. No light spilled out. The interior was just an even deeper cavity of blackness. He gestured inside, and Jeremy, the little wounded angel, took one step forward. Suddenly, the man lunged, It wasn't human speed. It was a blur, a sickening lurch of muscle and black fabric. He didn't grab Jeremy. He snatched him up with impossible ease, the boy's small, white-clad body defying gravity for a suspended moment. Jeremy let out a single, high-pitched scream that fractured, ending abruptly, as if a hand had been clamped over his face. The man didn't drag him. He hurled Jeremy's tiny form deep into the absolute darkness of the van. The child disappeared instantly. The two girls reacted not with terror, but with stunned, primal silence. They simply turned and ran, their feet pounding uselessly on the cobblestones, their candy bags forgotten. I dropped my coffee mug. The sound of ceramic shattering on my hardwood floor was the only thing that jarred me out of the paralyzing shock. I grabbed the phone, my fingers fumbling violently with the rotary dial. I was already dialing 911 before the van's doors slammed shut with a sickening, final clang. "I need a plate! I need a plate!" I screamed at myself, scrambling to the window. The van's engine caught. Not a healthy roar, but that continued, mechanical groan, now louder, more frantic. It peeled away from the curb, tires screeching against the damp stone. I tracked it desperately, trying to memorize the characters of the rear license plate. But I couldn't, because the license plate was obscured, not with dirt or a cloth, but by a chilling, defiant message painted haphazardly across the metal in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. The word was lost. The van vanished around the corner, leaving behind only the cold night air and the lingering metallic smell of the vehicle's engine. I slammed the phone to my ear. 911. What is your emergency? A child. A boy. He was taken. Van. Black van. On. I choked on the address, forcing the words out. The plate. It says LOST. The dispatcher, calm and maddeningly procedural, repeated the information. I described the killer's leather mask, the van's strange lack of reflection. She assured me units were en route. I stood by that shattered window for hours. When the police finally arrived, they treated me with detached professionalism, taking my statement, nodding at my detailed description of the mask, and giving me the standard, empty reassurance. But the image of the word lost, painted right where the registration should have been, was burned into my retinas. It wasn't just a plate. It was a declaration. Jeremy was never found. His missing persons posters, a heartbreaking collage of smiles and innocent wonder, soon appeared on every lamppost in Salem. They were a constant, brutal reminder of my failure, and the night I discovered that Halloween in Salem wasn't just about fun. It was the night the black hole came out to feed. This was the genesis of my hatred, the root of my perpetual terror. The absolute knowledge that evil walks among us, and sometimes it doesn't just pass by, it stops and takes. The Message from the Other Side, 2002. 7 years after Jeremy, my hatred for Halloween had solidified into a clinical anxiety. I was now 25, living in a quieter suburb outside Salem, trying and failing to write a book that was essentially a thinly veiled therapy session about the night in 1995. In 2002, the anxiety was compounded by the fact that my younger brother, Ethan, and his friend group, Lucas being the closest, were declaring their last year of trick-or-treating. They were 12, standing on the precipice of high school, where innocence was often traded for cynicism. Lucas was the heart of their group, sharp-witted, perpetually smiling, and annoyingly good at everything. This Halloween, He had constructed an elaborate, almost theatrical costume as a plague doctor. Long black coat, wide-brimmed hat, and the terrifying, beaked mask. He looked like an emissary of death, ironically fitting for the night. Around 8:30 p.m., the four boys returned to our house, their bags heavy with illicit bounty. That's when Lucas changed. "I'm not done," Lucas stated, his voice flat beneath the beak of his mask. "Dude, we hit 3 neighborhoods. We have enough sugar to stop a clock." My brother Ethan argued. "No, it has to be complete. It's the final night. I have to go to the old road," Lucas insisted, pointing toward the unlit edge of the neighborhood, a stretch known locally for its forgotten properties and rumors of old coven gatherings long ago. "No way, Lucas. That place is dead empty. Nobody gives out candy there," Ethan said, clearly unnerved. Lucas slowly removed his plague doctor mask. His face was unusually pale, his eyes holding an intense, almost feverish sheen I hadn't seen before. "I am completing the cycle. I need one last piece of the offering. If you won't come, I go alone." His demeanor was icy, unnerving. Lucas, always the reasonable one, was behaving like a ritualistic fanatic. When Ethan refused again, citing the late hour, Lucas didn't argue further. He simply replaced the beaked mask, transforming back into the ominous figure, and walked away without a backward glance. He vanished into the deepening shadows toward the old road. I couldn't shake the image of Lucas walking alone into that ancient darkness. It felt like watching a lamb volunteer for the slaughter. I went to bed late, unable to settle. Then, at 3 a.m., the witching hour, my old phone buzzed. It was a text message from Lucas. I grabbed the phone, my heart hammering, expecting a late-night joke or a triumphant message about a massive candy score. I tapped the screen. The text was short, jagged, and utterly incomprehensible. It read, "Hello, meet pliers." I stared at the characters. They weren't just misspelled. The accents, the random umlauts, the deliberate distortion of simple words. It was a scramble, a digital shriek. I tried to type back, asking what the hell it meant, but my fingers froze. I felt the cold, familiar spike of primal terror that I hadn't felt since 1995. I did something obsessive. I activated the phone's old predictive text function and typed out the characters Lucas had used. I wanted to see if it was a technical glitch, but the phone's dictionary violently rejected the sequence, offering no logical alternatives. The combination of letters and symbols was so far from any known word. It was as if an alien intelligence had briefly hijacked the device. Then a darker thought solidified. I quickly typed, "Help me, please." The phone immediately and correctly offered the full phrase. There was no way Lucas's message was a simple typo. The sequence "Hello, meet pliers" was a deliberate distortion, a coded message, or perhaps a garbled transmission of pure fear that his mind, or whatever was controlling it, could barely articulate. Lucas didn't show up for school on Monday. His mother, calling Ethan's mom, claimed he was battling a sudden, severe flu, but I didn't believe it. This wasn't sickness. This was a cover story for a seizure of the spirit. By Thursday, I was frantic. I biked over to Lucas's house, a small, gray New England colonial. I stood at the end of his long driveway and called his cell phone. It rang 3 times before he finally picked up. "Lucas? Are you there?" I whispered into the phone, my voice cracking. Silence. absolute silence. But then it came. A soft, thin sound. Not breathing, but a moist, guttural rasping. As if air was being drawn across dry, corrugated tissue. And beneath that rasping, I heard it. A faint, rapid whispering repetition of non-words. It sounded like a chant, a desperate, unintelligible prayer being recited at machine gun speed. "Lucas, what happened? Tell me what you saw on the old road. Just say anything." The rasping intensified, then a hard click. He had hung up. My heart shattered, mistaking the horror for rejection. I looked up at his bedroom window. The lace curtain twitched. Slowly, deliberately, a hand peeled back the curtain. And there was Lucas. But not Lucas. He was thin, yes, gaunt, but the most terrifying change was his demeanor. His head remained perfectly still. His eyes were not merely pale. They were two pools of absolute, depthless white, devoid of iris or pupil. They were the color of sun-bleached bone. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He simply stared directly through me, not at me, but through my body, as if he were scanning the structure of the universe behind me. I tried to wave, but my hand froze midair. He looked like an inmate of his own body, his spirit imprisoned, his sight turned inward. The silence between us was immense, terrifying. Then, with the same unsettling deliberateness, the curtain fell back into place. Lucas was gone. Days later, his mother, her own eyes sunken with a terror she couldn't name, told my parents that they were relocating abruptly for his father's new job. A blatant, desperate lie. Lucas hadn't been sick. He had been compromised. Something had happened on the old road. Something that had worn his face and sent a horrifying, desperate message into the night. And whatever it was, it had convinced his parents that the only remedy was total, immediate, irreversible flight. I knew then. Lucas hadn't sent a message begging for help. He had sent a warning from the other side of reality. A final, corrupted scream before the true horror claimed him. The cursed house of silence, adolescence. The years between Lucas's silent disappearance and the incident at the Void House had been a strange, anxious vacuum. My anxiety had morphed from simple dread into a rigid paranoia. We were 15, cynical enough to mock suburban normality, but still children when confronted by true, inexplicable horror. The Void House sat at the highest point of Gallows Hill, a fitting location given Salem's history. It wasn't just old. It was a testament to slow, agonizing decay, built from dark, water-stained wood that seemed to perpetually weep. Local lore insisted the land itself was cursed, a place where the boundaries of consciousness had been blurred by centuries of fear and blood. The house felt not just empty, but actively corrosive, stealing warmth and light from its surroundings. We often claimed it wasn't a structure, but a gargantuan stationary parasite. We were walking home, our teenage bravado fueled by cheap energy drinks and a desperate desire to appear fearless. Sam, our most volatile friend, the one whose confidence was just a thin veneer over deep insecurity, was the one who broke the silence. "I bet you my soul and every single piece of candy I still have that I knock on that door," Sam declared, his eyes fixed on the monolithic darkness. "Sam, don't be an idiot. That thing is swallowing the light around it, you can feel it." "It's not funny," I warned, the familiar, ice-cold dread from the night of the black van rising in my chest. "No, Ethan. That thing is waiting for acknowledgement." and I'm going to give it what it wants. He walked up the drive. The gravel beneath his worn sneakers didn't crunch. The sound seemed muffled, absorbed instantly by the house's silent gravity. We watched, unable to move, as he reached the porch, inhaled deeply, a nervous twitch, and raised his fist. Sam didn't just knock. He hammered the door with frantic, excessive force. But the sound that rebounded wasn't the expected, hollow rap of old wood. It was a low, subsonic thrum, a rhythmic, guttural pulse that felt less like a sound and more like a vibration felt deep within the bone marrow. It was the sound of something massive and ancient stirring from a long, troubled sleep. The door remained closed. Sam, encouraged by our terrified silence, and perhaps by the sheer adrenaline of his own terror, began to taunt the house. He danced a clumsy jig. He shouted an off-key chorus of the Ghostbusters theme, his voice echoing weakly against the house's silence. He was a tiny, defiant spark challenging a monumental, predatory stillness. "Come on, you pathetic old ghoul. Give me a trick, or I'll give you a treat you'll regret," he yelled, his voice laced with forced hysteria. And then the silence itself seemed to give way. Without a sound of grating wood or turning locks, the door cracked open a fraction. A mass of shadows, not an absence of light, but an active, swirling, three-dimensional entity of black, flowed out of the gap. It was formless, yet it instantly coalesced into a crude, unsettling humanoid shape defined by jagged edges and trailing strands that resembled thick, oily webbing. It was less a body and more a tear in reality given temporary form. The creature did not walk. It reached. The shadow extended a ropey limb, enveloped Sam's head and chest, and with a silent, terrifying swiftness, yanked his struggling, muffled body back into the pitch-black interior. The shadow form recoiled, and the heavy door slammed shut with a final, sickening thud. The immediate silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. We could no longer hear the ambient sounds of the neighborhood. We ran blindly, fueled by pure instinct, screaming Sam's name into the unresponsive dark. We found the nearest lit house, our pounding on the door sounding desperate and unhinged. When the police finally arrived, the minutes felt like hours measured in drops of cold sweat. 2 officers, clearly annoyed by the haunted house prank, cautiously approached the void house. They banged on the door, shouting, "Police! Open up!" After an agonizing span of silence, the door creaked open. A man stepped out. He was unremarkable, middle-aged, wearing a bland, stained cardigan. But his eyes, they held a disturbing shade of flat, expressionless gray marble, and possessed the same cold, predatory vacancy I had once seen in the black van driver, and later reflected in Lucas's eyes. And beside him stood Sam. Sam was physically whole, but something fundamental had been excised from him. His skin was the color of old parchment. His youthful defiance was gone, replaced by a rigid, shell-shocked stillness. The police questioned the man, who calmly explained that he was the caretaker, and the boys had been attempting vandalism. He dismissed our story of the shadow and the kidnapping as the wild imaginations of bored teenagers looking for a scare. Then the police turned to Sam. "Is that what happened, son? Were you trying to play a prank?" Sam looked up. His gaze did not meet the officer's eyes, or ours. It was fixed slightly over the caretaker's shoulder, as if watching something we couldn't see. He spoke in a voice that was small, hollow, and utterly, convincingly broken. "Yes, sir. We were just messing around. We made up the grabbing part. Sorry for the trouble. We were stunned into paralyzed silence. When the police finally drove us away, we cornered Sam at the first opportunity. We shouted, demanding to know why he lied. Sam didn't shout back. He just started crying, silent, hysterical tears that ran down his face. He made me go into a room, Sam choked out, his body trembling violently. He made me tell him everything. Not just my name, but the exact moment I was most afraid, what my parents' deepest secrets were. He didn't use pain. He just used pressure. But why lie to the cops, Sam? They were safe. They could have protected you. Sam's eyes snapped up, filled with a borrowed, terrifying conviction that didn't feel like his own. He told me he wouldn't kill me if I talked. He told me if I talked, he would show me again what I saw, but this time it would stay in my head forever. He would burn my mind out. What did you see, Sam? I whispered, feeling the cold fear of the unknown. What was in there that was so bad? Sam shrank back, clutching himself, his face contorted in a mask of pure terror. I can't. It's not a picture, Ethan. It's not a monster or a ghost. It's a feeling. It's the absolute, undeniable knowledge that all existence is a mistake. It's the color of madness. It's the truth you see when your mind stops fighting the void. He refused to elaborate further, not for years. But the terror was real. Sam never went near that part of Salem again. He didn't fear death. He feared the laceration of his own mind. He had looked into a place of pure, cognitive horror, and the only defense he had left was absolute, terrified silence. The house hadn't just taken a piece of him. It had implanted a secret in his soul, a secret that had the power to shatter his reality. The shotgun and the Siphoners mark, present day. After the horror of the void house and the subsequent fracturing of my core friendships, I realized Salem was a disease I had to excise. Every cobblestone, every ancient, brooding house whispered the names of the lost. Jeremy, Lucas, and the shell of Sam. I needed air, distance, and safety from the colonial dread that clung to Massachusetts. My opportunity came last September. A ludicrously well-paying job offer from a tech company nestled deep in the damp, green solitude of the Pacific Northwest. I took it not for the career, but for the distance. They offered me 12 months of complimentary housing. A small, isolated cabin-style house nestled in the dense woods outside Seattle. It was my first real house, a sanctuary 3,000 miles and a century away from Gallows Hill. I told myself I was safe. I was surrounded by redwoods and silence, not the whispers of dead witches. Yet, as October approached, the anxiety, always a low thrum beneath my skin, began to intensify. The calendar flipped to the 31st, and the familiar dread returned, laced with a new, perverse curiosity. This year I was going to participate. I was going to claim the night back. I meticulously prepared the house. I carved a pumpkin, a cheerful, aggressive smile that felt like a lie. I bought 2 immense bags of fun-sized candy, enough for a small army. I told myself that the mundane joy of trick-or-treaters would finally overwrite the nightmares. The evening started well. The woods seemed to push back the darkness, and the porch light created a welcoming glow. I saw dozens of children, their laughter bright and clean. A tiny Michael Myers, a truly chilling sight on a 10-year-old, made me genuinely jump. The joy was intoxicating, almost healing. By 9 p.m., the activity died down. My enormous bags of candy were nearly empty. Exhausted but strangely exhilarated, I cleared the last decorations and retreated indoors. I poured a beer, settled onto the sofa, and put on a cheesy B-grade horror movie, ready to finally relax. The only vulnerability I noted was the kitchen window beside the sofa, looking out onto the completely darkened driveway. I didn't bother drawing the blinds. The woods were my buffer. I was half watching the movie, the beer cold in my hand, when I heard it. It wasn't a bang. It wasn't the wind. It was a faint, almost delicate tap, 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 on the glass of the kitchen window. My blood turned instantly to glacial ice. The sound was too precise, too intentional to be anything random. It sounded less like a request for candy and more like a private summons. My mind immediately flashed back. The mechanical groan of the black van, the guttural rasping in Lucas's phone, the thrum of the void house. The tap was the new, terrifying melody of the horror that had defined my life. I gripped the remote, unable to move. My rational mind screamed, "It's a teenager, a prankster, someone wants more candy." But the residual fear from 2 decades of trauma insisted. This is it. This is the new chapter. I forced myself up, moving on legs made of lead. I walked slowly toward the window. I didn't snap the blinds open. I reached a shaking hand to the cord and carefully, agonizingly slow, pulled the thin plastic slats apart, creating a vertical slit through which I could peer out. In the faint spill of the living room light and the deep, oppressive blackness of the woods, I saw him, a lone figure, tall, thin, clad entirely in dark, shapeless clothing. His face was obscured by an old, cheap, navy blue ski mask, the kind criminals wear in bad movies. It was pulled taut over his features, leaving only jagged holes for the eyes. And he was not holding a candy bag. In both hands, steady and perfectly aimed directly at the center of my chest, he held a short, black shotgun. It wasn't sleek. It was beat up, worn, and seemed to have a history far dirtier than mere hunting. But it was his eyes that stopped my heart. They weren't black from the mask's shadow. They were immense, perfect circles of absolute, inhuman white. Not the whites of his eyes, but a substance that filled the entire cavity, the color of bleached bone, of pure, sunless snow. They were the same eyes I had seen briefly in Lucas's window, soulless, vacant, and terrifyingly focused. We locked gazes through the narrow slit of the blinds. In that second, an eternity stretched thin by terror, I felt an intimate connection to the man outside. I realized he wasn't looking at me, he was looking for me. I didn't scream. I didn't think. I simply dropped, falling onto the hardwood floor with a deafening thud that bruised my ribs and shoulder. I flattened myself beneath the window ledge, waiting for the blast, the shatter of glass, the metallic roar of the weapon. Silence. Only my ragged, panicked breathing. The blast never came. After what felt like 3 minutes but was probably 15 seconds, I heard a sharp sound, a car door slamming. Then, the furious, high-pitched scream of an engine being redlined, tires spitting gravel. The sound faded quickly into the deep quiet of the woods. Shaking violently, I called 911. The local police were predictably dismissive. They filed a report, suggested I get a hotel, and implied I had probably seen a very realistic costume. The lack of genuine urgency was infuriating, but I did leave, spending the night in a motel where I slept fitfully, haunted by the white eyes. The next afternoon, I received a call. It wasn't from a patrol officer. "Mr. Ethan, my name is Detective Carver. I'm with the Seattle Metro Task Force. I read your report." The voice was deep, authoritative, and lacked the usual police detachment. "I think I know who you saw and why they didn't shoot." He told me the house's true history. The previous occupants were not just simple gang members. They were a local cell of a much larger, more secretive organization known to the police only by their activities, the Siphoners. "They aren't dealers or thieves," Carver explained, his voice dropping. "They are fear profiteers. They use highly localized violence and psychological terror to prime a location. They believe that extreme, prolonged terror leaves a residue, a kind of dark spiritual energy that they harvest for rituals." My blood ran cold. "Rituals? Look, Mr. Ethan, I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in the organized worship of cruelty. We think this group uses certain dates, like Halloween, to test their locations. They use old, crude intimidation techniques to measure the fear. The man you saw? He was the harbinger. He was checking if the fear residue of the house was still strong." "But why didn't he shoot me?" "Because he recognized you weren't the target. He didn't want the heat of an accidental civilian murder. He retreated. They know the house is occupied by a stranger now. They won't come back." Carver's words were meant to be reassuring, but they had the opposite effect. They provided a framework that was simultaneously more rational and infinitely more terrifying than a simple home invasion. I pressed Carver. "What about the mask? The white eyes? Why a ski mask and an old shotgun?" Carver hesitated. "The mask is uniform, designed to depersonalize the target. The gun, we think it's just theatrical or maybe used for intimidation shots. They don't usually kill. They prefer the clean kill of the mind." The clean kill of the mind. The phrase echoed Sam's terrified whisper. He would let the knowledge burn out my mind. Suddenly, the fractured pieces of my life slammed together into a single, horrifying mosaic. The black hole in Salem, 1995. The black van, the grotesque leather mask, and the word, lost. Not random abduction, but the siphoning of a child's innocence and the shock of the observer. The van was a mobile ritual site. The Secret of Lucas, 2002. Lucas was sent to the old road, a forgotten, primed location. His plague doctor costume was an ironic invitation to a ceremonial terror. The message, "Hello, meet pliers," wasn't a typo, but a corrupted ritual language his captured mind was forced to transmit. He wasn't sick, he was siphoned. His spirit trapped, his body left as a shell. The Void House, Neanthu, the house itself, was a permanent siphoner location, using fear and psychological truth to lacerate the mind. Sam was not physically hurt, but the caretaker, a high-ranking siphoner, implanted a truth so terrifying that Sam's mind chose silence over annihilation. The caretaker's gray, vacant eyes were the same vacant eyes that now focused the shotgun at me. They weren't random events. They were a single, decades-long ritual spanning cities. And I wasn't just a witness. I was the constant, recurring element. I was the thread that connected every primed location. I was the bait, or perhaps the unwitting chronicler. I hung up with Detective Carver, the silence of my house now an oppressive, throbbing thing. The Siphoners hadn't just accidentally targeted my house. They had tracked me. They knew that wherever I went, my heightened awareness, my deep-seated trauma, and my capacity for panic would make the fear residue in any location immensely more potent. I was the multiplier of their dark harvest. I didn't pack up and leave. Couldn't. I had spent 2 decades running, and every time I stopped, the horror caught up, each incident more intimate and demanding than the last. Running was no longer a solution. It was a ritual in itself, guiding them to their next site. I walked to the kitchen window. The glass was cold. I pulled the blinds tightly shut, then reinforced them with thick black tape. I bought new locks, motion sensors, and security lights that bleached the woods in an aggressive artificial daylight. But the protection was meaningless. The Siphoners weren't after my body or my possessions. They were after the fear that lived inside me, the unique, distilled terror of a man who has repeatedly witnessed the impossible. I sleep now in brief, fitful cycles, always with the lights on. Every unexpected noise in the woods, every crack of the house's old timber, brings me bolt upright. But the worst part is the silence. I know they're out there, and I know that next Halloween, or maybe sooner, I will hear it again. That soft, patient, intentional sound that signals the next chapter of the ritual, the next demand for a piece of my sanity. The soft, private summons. Tap, 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 tap. The story of the lost has ended. The story of the hunted has begun.